The certificate frame on my office wall caught the light at 8:16 that morning. The Geneva airworthiness seal I'd earned 12 years ago, the first one Halberd ever held. I was looking at it when Roman Aldridge's assistant knocked and said the COO wanted 5 minutes before the stand-up. 5 minutes. That's all it took him to end it. "We're consolidating your function," he said, sliding the memo across. Nothing personal, just cleaner reporting lines. I read it twice. Then I set it down and asked one question. "Who's the authorized signatory on the export filings now?" He blinked. "That transfers automatically." "It doesn't." "Nothing about it transfers." My name wasn't a formality on those documents. It was the load-bearing wall. And by tomorrow, every door he thought he'd just walked through would already be sealed behind me. I picked up my pen, signed the acknowledgement, and said, "Understood." He had no idea what he'd just switched off. The Geneva seal on my wall was the first thing my eyes found every morning, and I never once thought it would become the thing that saved me. It hung in a slim brass frame just left of my monitor, the original airworthiness certificate, the very first international approval Halberd Aeronautics Group ever earned. My signature was in the corner. 12 years old, faded now, but mine. My name is Vela Marchetti. For the last 12 years, I ran program certification at Halberd, which is a plain title for a complicated job. What it meant, in practice, was that nothing we built left the ground legally without me. Every export license, every foreign airworthiness approval, every cross-border compliance filing that let us sell control systems and avionics packages to buyers in 4 countries, all of it flowed through my office on the 41st floor, and all of it carried my name as the authorized signatory of record. People upstairs never understood that. They understood revenue. They understood the pipeline, the $187 million in active foreign contracts we were carrying that year, spread across a defense-adjacent avionics deal in Switzerland, 2 commercial packages in South Korea, and a sensor suite bound for a manufacturer in Brazil. They saw the numbers on the quarterly slides. They did not see the architecture underneath, the certifications that made those numbers real instead of aspirational. I liked it that way mostly. I'm not a person who needs to be seen. I'd spent my career being the quiet, load-bearing wall in a building full of people who wanted to be the view from the top floor. My work was invisible precisely because it worked. When certifications hold, nobody thinks about them. They only become visible when they fail. That morning, a Wednesday in late October, I got in at 7:41. The floor was mostly empty. I made my coffee in the little executive kitchen with the ridiculous view of the bay, and I read through the overnight correspondence from our Geneva liaison. A renewal window was opening on the Swiss avionics certification in 6 weeks. Routine. I'd already begun the paperwork. I initialed my notes and moved on. I didn't know yet that by the end of the day, none of that routine would matter. The trouble had a name, and the name was Roman Aldridge. He'd arrived 4 months earlier as our new chief operating officer, installed by the private equity group that had absorbed Halberd in a merger the previous spring. Aldridge was the kind of executive who talked about velocity in every meeting and legacy overhead whenever he meant people. He wore expensive minimalism, no tie, gray everything, a watch that cost more than a car, and he had a habit of speaking to you while looking at his phone, so you were never quite sure if the conversation was happening. His mandate, as far as anyone could tell, was to strip the company down to its core value drivers and cut everything he decided was friction. He had a spreadsheet. Everyone knew about the spreadsheet. Rows of names, functions, costs. A column he called Consolidation Candidates. I had heard, secondhand, that my department was flagged in yellow. I wasn't worried exactly. I was cautious. There's a difference, and 12 years in compliance teaches you to feel it in your spine before your head catches up. The first real signal came 2 weeks before the Wednesday. I was called into a process review, Aldridge's language, in the glass conference room they'd renamed Summit after the merger, as if a name could change what happened inside it. He sat at the head of the table with a young operations analyst beside him, a nervous kid named Perry who kept clicking a pen. "Vela," Aldridge said, still scrolling. "Walk me through what your team actually produces." Not does. Produces. Like I ran a factory line. I explained it plainly. The certifications, the export licenses, the signatory authority. The fact that our foreign revenue was legally dependent on filings that had to be maintained, renewed, and, critically, attached to a named, authorized individual who met the regulatory competency requirements in each jurisdiction. He nodded the way people nod when they've stopped listening. "So it's paperwork," he said. "It's the legal foundation the paperwork sits on," I said. "The forms are the easy part. The authority behind them isn't transferable like a login." "Everything's transferable," he said, and smiled without warmth. "That's what consultants are for." Perry clicked his pen. I let the silence sit for a moment, the way I'd learned to. "Some things are," I said. "This isn't one of them. The certifications are filed against me personally, by name, because the regulators in each country require a qualified individual of record. Not a company, a person." Aldridge finally looked up from his phone. For half a second, I thought something had landed. Then he said, "We'll figure it out," and moved on to the next slide. That was the moment I understood he genuinely did not hear me. Not that he disagreed, that he couldn't process it as real. In his model of the world, everything a company owned was a line item that could be reassigned, outsourced, or deleted. The idea that a single human being could be a structural dependency didn't fit anywhere in his spreadsheet. I went back to my office. I looked at the Geneva seal on the wall, and for the first time in 12 years, I did something I'd never felt the need to do before. I made copies, not of anything secret. Everything was already documented. I simply printed clean records of every active certification, every export license, and the regulatory language in each jurisdiction specifying that the authorized signatory of record could not be substituted without a full requalification process submitted by the named individual and approved by the foreign authority. In Switzerland, that process took a minimum of 90 days. In South Korea, closer to 5 months. In Brazil, there was no expedited path at all. I put the printouts in a folder. I didn't have a plan. I just had a feeling, that old spinal certainty, that I would want the facts organized, on paper, when the moment came. That evening I stayed late. The floor emptied out. The city lights came up across the bay, and I sat at my desk longer than I needed to, running the dependency map in my head the way I'd run it 100 times for audits. Which contracts depended on which certifications depended on which filings, and which filings depended, at their root, on one name: mine. If that name came off the org chart, if I was consolidated, restructured, deleted from Aldridge's spreadsheet, the certifications didn't transfer to a successor. They didn't pause. They lapsed. And the moment a foreign airworthiness certification lapses, every contract resting on it converts, overnight, from a legal export into an illegal one. 90 days minimum to fix, in the best jurisdiction, with no shortcut. I closed the folder, slid it into my bag, and went home. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. The email came in at 10:41 on Tuesday morning, 3 days before it all went wrong, and it was the kind of message that tells you everything by what it doesn't say. Subject, certification function, consolidation review. Sender, Roman Aldridge. No greeting, no context. Just a meeting request for that afternoon in the summit room and a single line. Bring a summary of your active filings. We're streamlining ownership of key processes. Streamlining ownership. I read those two words several times. In 12 years at Halberd Aeronautics Group, I had learned that when leadership talked about ownership, they usually meant taking something away from the person who actually owned it. I printed my summary anyway. One clean page, the 4 active foreign contracts, the certifications attached to each, and, in the last column, the line I knew Aldridge would skim past. Authorized signatory of record, V. Marchetti. I brought the page because I was thorough, not because I thought it would change anything. By then, I already understood that Aldridge didn't lose arguments. He simply stopped having them. The summit room was full when I walked in. That was the first thing I noticed. This wasn't a quiet process review. Aldridge had an audience. Perry, the nervous analyst, was there again, laptop open. So was Danica Holt, the new head of operations Aldridge had brought over from the private equity side, a woman who smiled a great deal and agreed with him constantly. 2 junior program managers I'd mentored sat near the back, and I watched them not look at me, which told me they already knew what this was. Aldridge didn't stand. He gestured at a chair the way you'd point at a spot for a dog. "Vela, thanks for coming down." He was scrolling, of course. "We've been mapping the certification function against value contribution, and the numbers are telling us something we can't ignore." I sat. I set my one page on the table, face up. "And what are they telling you?" "That we've built a bottleneck." He finally looked at me, and there was a kind of rehearsed patience in his face, the look of a man who'd already decided how this scene ended and was mildly bored waiting to reach it. "Every foreign filing routes through a single person. That's not a strength. That's a single point of failure. We're moving to a distributed model, cloud-based, vendor-supported, scalable. Certification as a service." Certification as a service. I let the phrase sit in the air. "The filings aren't a workflow you can distribute," I said quietly. "They're regulatory instruments. Each foreign authority requires a named, qualified individual of record. That individual is vetted, approved, and registered by them, not by us. You can't reassign that with a vendor contract any more than you can outsource someone's medical license." Danica Holt gave a small laugh, light, dismissive, the sound of someone signaling which side she was on. "That sounds like exactly the kind of legacy thinking we're trying to move past," she said. "Everything's transferable if you build the right process." I looked at her. She had been at the company for 6 weeks. Aldridge picked it up smoothly. "Here's where we've landed. Effective at the end of the week, we're consolidating your role into the new operations structure. Danica's team will absorb the certification function. We appreciate everything you've built, genuinely, but the org's moving in a direction that doesn't have a standalone certification VP in it." There it was. Not, "You're fired." Never that clean. Consolidated. Absorbed. The corporate vocabulary designed to make the person on the receiving end feel like they'd become obsolete through no one's decision, like weather. I kept my voice even. "Who becomes the signatory of record on the 4 active certifications?" A flicker. Just a small one, at the corner of his mouth. He hadn't planned for the question, and men like Aldridge hate being asked something they don't have an answer to in front of an audience. "That's an administrative handoff," he said. "Legal and Danica's team will manage the transition. It's paperwork." "It's not paperwork," I said. "It's a requalification." Each authority has to independently vet and approve a new named individual before the certification can transfer. Until they do, the certification doesn't sit with anyone. And a foreign airworthiness certification that doesn't sit with a qualified person of record isn't dormant. It lapses. The nervous analyst, Perry, stopped typing. Aldridge leaned back and did the thing I'd watched him do to other people for 4 months. He smiled, and he made his voice warm, and he used that warmth as a weapon. Vela, I know this is hard. 12 years is a long time, and it's natural to feel like the place can't run without you. Everybody feels that way on their way out, but no one is irreplaceable. That's not an insult. It's just how healthy organizations work. The graveyards are full of people who thought the building would fall down without them. Someone near the back exhaled a small laugh. One of the program managers I'd trained. He caught himself immediately, but I heard it. In a room, there is always one nervous laugh, and it always comes from the person most afraid of being next. I didn't react to the laugh. I looked at Aldridge, and I felt something settle in me. Not anger exactly. Clarity. The cold, quiet clarity of watching a man saw through the branch he's sitting on and mistake it for progress. I understand, I said. And I did. I understood more than he could imagine. Good. He was already looking back at his phone. Danica will send over the transition plan. HR will handle the paperwork Wednesday. We'd love for you to help make the handoff smooth, for the team's sake. For the team's sake. He wanted me to train the vendor, to hand over, with a smile, the one thing that made me structurally necessary, so that its disappearance would look like my choice. Of course, I said. I picked up my single page from the table. As I stood, Danica reached out. I'll take that, the filing summary. It'll be helpful for the transition. I paused for just a second. Then I slid the page across to her. Keep it, I said. It's a copy. She smiled, pleased, thinking she'd taken something from me. She'd taken a printout. What she couldn't take, what none of them understood was even a separate thing from the printout, was the name in the last column, and the fact that the 4 foreign authorities in Geneva, Seoul, and Sao Paulo had that name, not Halberd's, on file as the sole person legally permitted to hold those certifications open. That afternoon, I went back up to the 41st floor. I didn't clean out my office. I didn't send an all-caps email to anyone. I sat at my desk, and I looked at the Geneva seal in its brass frame, and I opened my laptop and did exactly one thing. I pulled up the correspondence log for all 4 foreign authorities, the official portals where a signatory of record can update their status. And I read, one more time, the automated language every one of those systems runs on. The language nobody at Halberd had ever bothered to learn because it had never mattered while I was there to absorb it. Upon separation of the authorized individual of record from the sponsoring organization, active certifications enter a suspension state, pending requalification of a successor. Suspended certifications are not valid for export. Not if someone remembers to file. Not unless HR sends a form. Automatic. Triggered by one event, my separation. Aldridge was going to fire me on Wednesday, and the systems in 3 countries were going to do the rest by themselves. I closed the laptop. Outside the glass, the bay had gone silver in the late afternoon light. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried at all. I just needed to wait. Before I tell you how far this actually went, let me stop here for a moment, because this is the part where I still ask myself what I would have done in your place. If your boss told you, in front of the whole room, that no one is irreplaceable and that the building would run fine without you, would you have argued? Or would you have done what I did? signed the paper, stayed calm, and let the silence become your answer. Tell me in the comments, fight loudly or wait quietly. I read every reply, and if you believe some people are worth far more than the title on their door, take a second to subscribe. It's how these stories keep finding the people who need them. Because what happened on Thursday morning when the first license went dark was only the beginning. Have you ever watched someone panic in slow motion? First as confusion, then as denial, then as the cold understanding that they did this to themselves? That was Roman Aldridge on Thursday, and I wasn't even in the building to see the beginning of it. I was home when the first message arrived. Not from Aldridge, from Perry, the nervous analyst, at 8:19 in the morning. He'd found my personal email somehow, probably from an old contact sheet, and the message was 3 lines long. Ms. Marchetti, sorry to bother you. The Geneva portal is showing our certification as suspended. Danica says to ignore it, but shipping is asking, is this normal? I read it twice, the way I read everything twice now. Then I set the phone down on my kitchen counter and made coffee because there was nothing to do. The system had already done it. Exactly the way I'd told them it would, in a room full of people who decided I was legacy overhead. Let me explain what actually happened because the mechanism matters more than the drama. When I signed the acknowledgement of my termination on Wednesday, Halberd's HR system did what it always does. It flagged my status as separated and pushed the update through the integrations that touched external systems. One of those integrations connected to the regulatory portals in Geneva, Seoul, and São Paulo, where the authorized signatory of record for each certification was registered. My name, my credentials, my qualification, filed personally with each foreign authority. The moment those portals received the separation flag, they did exactly what their own rules require. They moved every certification tied to my name into a suspension state. Not canceled, suspended, pending requalification of a successor. And a suspended airworthiness certification is a legal switch flipped to off. Any product shipped under it, any contract fulfilled through it is, from that instant, an unlicensed export. 4 contracts. $187 million in active foreign business. Switzerland, 2 in South Korea, 1 in Brazil. All of them resting on certifications that were now, as of 8 a.m. Thursday, dark. I want to be clear about something, because this is the part people always misunderstand. I didn't do this. I didn't hack a portal or trigger an alarm or send a vengeful email. I did nothing. That was the whole point. The genius of it, if you can call arithmetic genius, was that it required my absence, not my action. Aldridge fired the load-bearing wall and then seemed surprised the ceiling came down. The system enforced the reality he refused to hear in that meeting. By 9, Perry's messages had stopped. I imagined Danica had told him to close his laptop and let the grown-ups handle it. I imagined wrong about the grown-ups. Here is how I know the timeline, filled in later from 3 different people who were there. At 8:40, the São Paulo shipping partner sent a formal notice. The Brazilian sensor suite shipment scheduled for that afternoon could not clear customs. The certification on file had entered suspension overnight. Export documentation was invalid. They needed the responsible individual of record to confirm status within the business day, or the shipment would be held indefinitely. At 9:05, the Korean Commercial Partners Compliance Office called, not emailed, called, asking why Halberd's airworthiness authorization had lapsed on 2 active packages. Their legal team wanted an explanation before the next milestone payment released. Milestone payments, I should mention, that added up to just over $60 million across the 2 Korean contracts. At 9:30, Geneva stopped answering. That one wasn't dramatic in the way the movies would want it. There was no slammed phone. The Swiss authorities simply did what regulators do when a certification enters an irregular state. They went quiet, opened an internal review, and declined to discuss the file with anyone who wasn't the registered individual of record. And the registered individual of record no longer worked at Halberd Aeronautics Group. So when Danika's team tried to call in, tried to email, tried to escalate, they got the regulatory equivalent of a closed door, politely, in French, with a case number. I'd built this without ever meaning to build it. That's the truth I keep coming back to. It started 12 years ago, in a cramped office 2 buildings and 1 merger ago, when Halberd was small and hungry and trying to break into its first foreign market. I was the one who did the certification work because no one else wanted to learn it. It was tedious, it was foreign language heavy, it required understanding regulatory frameworks in 3 legal systems. Everyone else chased revenue. I chased the paperwork that made revenue legal. I remember the day the Geneva certification came through, the first international approval Halberd ever held. I framed it. Not because I was proud in a loud way, but because I understood, even then, what it represented. That certificate was the door, and my name was the key that opened it, because Swiss regulators don't certify companies. They certify a qualified person who then vouches for the company. That's how their system works. That's how Korea's works. That's how Brazil's works. Over the years, as Halberd grew, as it added the Korean contracts and then the Brazilian one, I remained the person of record on every filing. Not out of ambition, out of continuity. It would have taken months to qualify a second individual in each jurisdiction, and no one upstairs ever saw the point of spending money to certify a backup for a function they didn't even understand was load-bearing. Every year I renewed the certifications under my name. Every year I was the single point of failure Aldridge had so proudly identified in that meeting and then removed without replacing. He'd looked at the dependency map and seen a flaw. He never understood he was looking at a foundation. By 10:41 Thursday morning, the calls had started reaching people above Aldridge. I know this because the CFO, a measured man named Henrik Lindqvist, who had been at Halberd almost as long as I had, tried to reach me. Twice. I let both calls go to voicemail, not out of cruelty, out of precision. I wanted the situation to be fully, undeniably understood before I said a single word. A problem half understood gets solved on the cheap. A problem fully understood gets solved on your terms. The second voicemail was short. I still remember it almost exactly. Vela, it's Henrik. We have a situation with the foreign certifications, and I think you already know that. Please call me. This is not about Wednesday. This is about something much larger, and I need your help before it gets worse. Before it gets worse. He didn't know yet how much worse it could get, because it wasn't just the 4 active contracts frozen in place. It was the renewal window on the Swiss certification opening in 6 weeks, a window that, without me, no one at Halberd was qualified to walk through. Miss it, and the Geneva certification wouldn't just be suspended. It would expire, and a Swiss airworthiness certification, once expired, doesn't get reinstated with a phone call. It gets rebuilt from zero. 18 months of process. Minimum. I sat at my kitchen counter, the phone face down beside my cooling coffee, and I looked out at nothing in particular, and I thought about Aldridge somewhere on the 41st floor, watching 4 contracts and a decade of foreign market access blink out one portal at a time. He told me no one was irreplaceable. He was about to spend the next several days finding out exactly what I was worth. Priced not by his spreadsheet, but by the countries that only trusted the name he'd just thrown away. They called the meeting for Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the summit room, and this time I was the one who set the time. That's worth explaining because 4 days earlier, I couldn't have gotten Roman Aldridge to hold a door for me. Now, Halberd Aeronautics Group had sent me a formal letter on letterhead, signed by 2 officers, requesting my presence at my convenience to discuss a path forward regarding the foreign certification portfolio. At my convenience. I chose Friday. I chose 2 o'clock. I told them I'd need the full executive team present, plus outside counsel. They agreed to every term without a single pushback. When a company is bleeding, it stops negotiating over the color of the bandage. I arrived at 1:58. The lobby guard, a man named Farrell who'd worked the desk for years and always waved me through, stood up when he saw me. "Ms. Marchetti," he said, and there was something careful in it. Word travels in a building. Everyone below the 41st floor already knew that the woman they'd walked out on Wednesday was walking back in on Friday, and that the difference between those 2 days was measured in 9 figures. The summit room was full. Roman Aldridge sat where he always sat, at the head of the table, but he didn't look like the man who'd slid a memo at me and gone back to his phone. He looked like he hadn't slept. Danica Holt was there, notably not smiling. Henrik Lindqvist, the CFO, sat with a legal pad already covered in notes. 2 attorneys I didn't recognize flanked a man I did. Aldridge's own boss, a partner from the private equity group that had bought us, flown in that morning. His name was Cassian Rowan, and he had the stillness of a man who had learned everything he needed to know on the plane. I set my folder on the table. The same folder I'd assembled 2 weeks earlier when I was still telling myself I was being paranoid. "Thank you all for coming," I said, as if it were my meeting. Because it was. Rowan spoke first. He didn't waste time. "Ms. Marchetti, I'll be direct. As of this morning, 4 of our active foreign contracts are frozen. Switzerland, Korea, Brazil. Roughly $187 million in committed revenue that we currently cannot legally fulfill. Our compliance team tells me the certifications entered suspension the moment your separation processed, and that they cannot be reinstated without you." He folded his hands. "I'd like to understand my options." I appreciated that. A direct question deserves a direct answer. "Your options are narrow," I said. "Let me walk you through them, so no one leaves this room with a wrong assumption." I opened the folder and laid out the first page. Option 1. You qualify a new individual of record in each jurisdiction. This is legitimate, and I'd encourage it long term. But the timelines are set by the foreign authorities, not by us. Switzerland. 90 days minimum, and that's if the candidate already holds the technical qualifications, which no one currently at Halberd does. Korea. Closer to 5 months. Brazil. There is no expedited path. During those windows, the certifications remain suspended, and every day of suspension is a day those 4 contracts sit frozen. Your Korean partner has milestone payments, a little over $60 million, that release only against a valid airworthiness authorization. Those payments do not come. Your Brazilian shipment is already held at customs. The room was very quiet. Perry, the young analyst, wasn't in it. This was above his pay grade now. Option 2, I continued. You wait for the Geneva renewal window, which opens in 5 weeks and closes shortly after. If a qualified person of record does not walk through that window, the Swiss certification does not merely stay suspended. It expires. And an expired Swiss airworthiness certification is not reinstated. It is rebuilt. From 0. 18 months minimum. Your Swiss contract does not survive that. Neither, I'd guess, does your relationship with that buyer. Aldridge finally spoke. His voice had lost all of its velocity. You could requalify. You already hold the credentials. You could file today. I could, I said. I let it sit. But I don't work here. You restructured my function on Wednesday. You'll remember the meeting. You told me no one is irreplaceable, that the graveyards are full of people who thought the building would fall down without them. I watched that line land on him in front of his own boss. He'd said it to humiliate me in a room of witnesses. Now the witnesses were remembering it too. That was, he started. It was accurate, I said gently. No one is irreplaceable, but some functions can't be replaced on your timeline. That's not the same thing, and it's the distinction that just cost you 4 contracts. You didn't fire a person. You deregistered a signature that 3 foreign governments require. The system did the rest. I didn't lift a finger. I want that on the record. I took no action against this company. I simply stopped being available to hold up something no one else was qualified to hold. Cassian Rowaney leaned forward. What do you want, Ms. Marchetti? And there it was, the real question. The one Aldridge had never once thought to ask me in 12 years. I closed the folder. I'm not returning as an employee, I said. That role no longer exists. You consolidated it. If I come back, it's as the sole external principal of a certification entity that I own, contracted to Halberd with full and exclusive authority over every foreign filing. My name goes back on the certifications because it never legally left me, not the company's, mine. I slid the terms across the table. The engagement is priced at $2.4 million annually, paid quarterly in advance. I requalify and reinstate all 4 certifications on an expedited basis, using relationships with those authorities that I have personally maintained for over a decade. Relationships that are, frankly, why Geneva stopped taking your calls but will take mine. In exchange, I hold uncontestable authority over compliance decisions. No override. No streamlining. If anyone attempts to consolidate, distribute, or vendor out this function again, the contract terminates and the certifications go with me. The same way they just did, except next time it will be on purpose. Danica Holt made a small sound. Not quite a word. And one more term, I said. Non-negotiable. The individual who authored the decision to remove certification authority without qualifying a successor does not sit above this function. Not because I'm bitter, because he demonstrated at a cost of $187 million that he does not understand what it protects. I will not report to that judgment again. Every head in the room turned toward Roman Aldridge. Not because anyone instructed them to, because for the second time that week, the consequences had a direction, and everyone in the room could see exactly where it pointed. Aldridge's face had gone a color I'd never seen on it. He tried the only move he had left. This is extortion, he said. She engineered this. She let it happen on purpose. You can't reward. I engineered nothing, I said, and my voice didn't rise. I warned you in this room 2 weeks ago. There's a summary of that meeting in your operations analyst's notes. I told you the certifications were filed against a named individual and could not be reassigned like a login. You called it legacy thinking. Ms. Holt called it exactly that, in fact. I looked at her. She looked at the table. I didn't set a trap. I gave you the map. You drove off the road you were warned about, at speed, with your foot on the gas. Roan held up a hand. Aldridge stopped talking. The partner looked at me for a long moment. Then he did the arithmetic out loud, the way people do when they've already made a decision and just want to hear it confirmed. $2.4 million a year against $187 million frozen today, and a Swiss contract that dies in 5 weeks without her. He almost smiled. That's not extortion, Roman. That's the cheapest problem in this building." He turned to me and extended his hand across the table. "We have a deal, Ms. Marchetti. Send the contract to my office directly, not through operations." I shook it. And Roman Aldridge sat at the head of a table that was no longer his, in a room that had turned around him one person at a time, and understood at last exactly what he had switched off on a Wednesday morning, and exactly what it had been worth. The contract was signed the following Tuesday, and by the end of that week, the 41st floor had rearranged itself around a decision no one wanted to say out loud. I didn't move back into my old office. That was the first thing people got wrong when they imagined how this went. I never returned to a desk at Halberd Aeronautics Group, Marchetti Certification Group, the entity I incorporated that weekend, sole principal, one name on the door, and that name was mine. Operated out of a small floor I leased 11 blocks away, with a view of nothing in particular and a door that locked from the inside. Halberd was now a client, my largest for the moment, not my employer. The distinction was the entire point, and I made sure the paperwork reflected it in language no reorg could ever quietly rewrite. The reinstatement itself was almost anticlimactic, which is how you know a thing was built on real foundations rather than theater. I requalified as the individual of record with each of the 3 foreign authorities, a process that, for me, took days rather than months, because the relationships were already there. The Geneva reviewer who had stopped taking Halberd's calls took mine within an hour. I had corresponded with her office for 11 years. She knew my filings the way you know a familiar handwriting. When the certifications lifted out of suspension and went active again, the Brazilian shipment cleared customs, the Korean milestone payments released, and the Swiss renewal window, the one that would have expired into an 18-month rebuild, was walked through cleanly, on time, by the only person qualified to walk through it. $187 million in frozen contracts, unfrozen. Not by a heroic gesture. By a signature that had always, legally, belonged to me. Roman Aldridge did not survive it. I want to be precise about how he fell, because it wasn't dramatic and it wasn't loud, and that made it worse for him. There was no perp walk, no security escort, no viral moment. There was simply a quiet reassessment by the private equity partners who had installed him, led by Cassian Rowain, who had flown in expecting to manage a personnel problem and left having watched his own COO cost the portfolio a 9-figure freeze through a decision that a single afternoon of listening would have prevented. Rowain was not a sentimental man. He did the arithmetic the way he did everything, coldly and only once. A COO whose signature restructuring had nearly voided the company's entire foreign revenue was not an asset. He was a liability with a corner office. Aldridge was gone within the month. The internal language was pursuing opportunities better aligned with his operating style. I almost admired it. It was the same species of sentence he'd used on me. The corporate vocabulary that turns a firing into weather. Except this time, it was true. His operating style really was the problem. It just took $187 million to make it visible to the people above him. I heard later that on his last day he asked to speak with me. A 5-minute meeting, his assistant said, the way he had once granted me 5 minutes before a stand-up. I declined. Not out of cruelty. I simply had nothing to say to him that the outcome hadn't already said more clearly. Some conversations are only useful to the person who lost, and I had learned long ago not to spend my time on the losing party's need for closure. Danica Holt lasted a while longer, then quietly transferred back to the private equity side, where everything is transferable is a survivable philosophy because nothing there depends on a foreign regulator knowing your name. I don't think about her much. She had been at the company 6 weeks when she laughed at me in that meeting. She was gone within the year. The people who agree fastest with the loudest man in the room are always the first to be reassigned when the room changes shape. Perry, the nervous analyst who clicked his pen, who found my personal email and asked if the suspension was normal, Perry, I remembered. When Marchetti's certification group needed its first employee 8 months in, I called him. He'd been the only one in that summit room who stopped typing when I explained what a lapsed certification actually meant. That's a rare thing, the instinct to stop and listen at the exact moment everyone else has decided not to. He said yes before I finished the sentence. He runs my Brazilian and Korean filings now. He no longer clicks his pen. I never mentioned the meeting, and neither did he. Some silences don't need to be named to be forgiven. The Geneva seal still hangs in a brass frame. Not at Halberd anymore. I took it with me the Wednesday I signed the acknowledgement, because it was mine, because my signature was in the corner, because a certificate that certifies a person belongs to the person and not the building. It hangs now in my own office, above my own desk, and I look at it most mornings the way I always have. I think sometimes about what Aldridge said to me in that meeting, that no one is irreplaceable, that the graveyards are full of people who thought the building would fall down without them. He was right, in a narrow way. No one is irreplaceable. I never claimed to be. But there's a difference between being replaceable and being replaceable on his timeline, and that difference was the load-bearing wall he sawed through while congratulating himself on the view. You can replace anyone. What you cannot do is replace them retroactively, before 3 foreign governments notice the name has changed. Time is the one asset no reorg can consolidate. A woman who used to report to me asked, months later, over coffee, whether I'd known, whether I'd planned it, the suspension, the cascade, the whole quiet collapse. I told her the truth. I hadn't planned anything. I had simply refused to pretend that a signature was a formality when I knew it was a foundation. I made copies of the facts, I organized them in a folder, and then I did the hardest thing there is to do when a loud man is telling a room that you're obsolete. I did nothing. I let the structure speak. That's the part people never understand, I told her. They think leverage is something you use. It isn't. Leverage is something you are. And the only mistake you can make is letting someone convince you it's paperwork. She wrote that down. I hope she keeps her own copies. The certifications come up for renewal again next spring. My name is on all of them. It always was.